So welcome to Gardening 101. You guys are on an exciting journey. I think that for me, gardening has been just an incredible way to connect with other people and connect with nature and to make myself and my family healthier. And I think for some people, gardening can feel kind of intimidating, just like when you first learn to start cooking. It's both an art and a science. To gardening. There's lots of different recipes and different tricks and things that you can learn. And the thing about gardening is if you have a good grasp on kind of why you're doing it, why do you cook? It's because, well, you can save money, you can eat a lot better, healthier. And when you first start cooking, maybe you're just putting something in the microwave, but at least you're getting something back. And there's gardening secrets that can be as easy as putting something in the microwave. If you put in a white mulberry tree in the ground, it's going to grow pretty well here, and you're going to get fruit. And there could be some things that go wrong, and we'll look at some of those basics. But the thing to stay focused on is like, why are we doing this? And I'm going to share a little bit of my story about what motivates me to garden and keeps me going, because inevitably you're going to have some plants fail. You're going to, just like when you're cooking, you're going to accidentally forget to turn down the heat on the stove, and you're going to have something burn. And so when you can keep in mind, why are we doing this? It can really motivate you to get past those early mistakes. And if you accept the fact that you're probably going to have some plants that die, it doesn't mean you have a brown thumb. It just means that maybe you made a simple mistake. And the more variety that you plant in your garden, the more likely something is going to do really well. And so, you also don't have to limit yourself to annual plants that you have to replant every year. You can put in perennial plants that produce food year after year. And so I'll mention a few of those in my presentation. But the bulk of what I'm going to be talking tonight is the secret of healthy soil. And when you have healthy soil, it makes everything else about gardening a lot easier, and you're much more likely to have success. So we're going to we'll start there in just a little bit, but I want to share a little bit about who I am. Let's see, I pushed the down arrow and my slide is not advancing. Let's see, not sure. Here, let me see.
Or you just click on the slide.
Okay, yeah, here we go. So I come from a long line of Mennonite farmers and gardeners. So my family, I grew up in a family where we produced probably at least half of our own food from our own garden, and we had chickens and goats. And so this is a picture of my grandparents' garden. You can see that really rich, black, healthy soil there. And my great-grandfather, who's pictured there, Ira, had an early organic farm that he started in the 60s and 70s down in Florida. And so, and he's, lived to almost 100. And the reason I'm sharing this is, this is a 4th-generation photo 29 years later. My grandmother will turn 100 this year. And this isn't at all unusual for people that garden. There was a study done of 5 different communities in the world that had the most people that lived to over 100 years of age. And two of the things that really stood out in that study of what was similar between Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Loma Linda, California, what really stood out to the researchers was that in all of those places, people in those communities valued cooperative relationships with each other. And that's something we gardeners really care about. Those of us that are in the urban ag work group know what it's like to work with a good group of people who are all striving for a common goal. And they also tended gardens. And so that's one more reason, besides just the delight to all 5 of our senses that gardening can be. That's another good reason to garden. So when you keep those things in mind, a few plants that die, it doesn't matter. If you're growing things that you like to eat, you're going to eat a lot healthier. The food's going to be a lot more nutritious because it didn't sit on an airplane and fly all the way from California. It was something that was picked that day, and so it didn't have any time to lose nutrients through evapotranspiration. So keeping those things in mind can help us as, we overcome the first challenges as we're learning to garden and grow our own food. And so what I'd like to focus on is some real basic things that sometimes gardeners miss when they're first getting started. And so I want to pose the question to you to start thinking about: what do plants need to thrive? And I can think of kind of 5 very basic things that plants need to thrive. I don't know if anyone wants to throw in the chat any ideas. It's nice to make this a little more interactive. I think you'll learn more. I'm looking to see, there's a whole bunch of chats coming in. And sunlight, definitely. Plants need sun. Air, that's right. It's a really important one. Water, sun, soil. Water, sunlight, nutrients, good. Yep. So I love that. Yes. I don't have that on my next slide, but I think that the more we extend ourselves to think from the perspective of the plant, the closer, we know that plants make us healthy. Now we can love the plant to think about how we can make that plant healthy. And so it is a mutually beneficial relationship. So nutrients typically come from the soil, the growth medium. And so let's see, I am really having my usual slide advancing isn't working. Yeah. All right. So when we think about air, it's not just carbon dioxide that the plant breathes in and then breathes out oxygen. It's air at the roots. And so a common gardening mistake is to compact the soil, to step on the soil right around where the plants are. And when you step on the soil, you're squishing all the air out of it. And so then the plant's root can't breathe, and it makes it much more difficult for the plant to live, and it's more prone to have diseases and stress from insects and so forth. So the other way that we often have problems with air, the lack of air in plants, is too much water. If you don't put drain holes at the bottom of a cup, for example, when you're planting a seed in it, you're very likely to have too much water when you water it. And if anytime plant roots sit in sitting water, they're much more likely to get fungal diseases, and they're much more likely to die. There are, a few plants, some trees that can survive, and swamp plants that can survive in anaerobic conditions. But most plants, they've evolved some type of extra capacity to survive underwater. But almost all of our garden plants should not be sitting in heavy water. And too much clay also holds a lot of water. So doing something to aerate the soil to bring more compost always improves soil structure to provide more air spaces. Water, of course, you want to have plants need water to survive. They need sunlight. A really common mistake in our Northern Virginia area is to try to plant in areas where there's tall trees and you're not getting quite enough sunlight. Now, there are things that can grow and do well with less sunlight, but in general, the more sunlight a plant gets, the more it will fruit. And so that's a common issue with plants. And then, of course, the growth medium is what we're really going to focus on, because that's where a plant gets all 16 of the macronutrients and micronutrients that a plant needs come from the soil that it grows in. One of the great things about compost is because it's an old plant that's decayed, it has all 16 essential nutrients that a plant needs. And so one of the really exciting kind of frontiers of new research is soil. In 1 teaspoon of productive soil, there can be over as much as 1 billion microbes. And these are microbes that can actually work that can form beneficial relationship with plants. In fact, without some of these microbes, many plants struggle to be able to grow and do well, which is one reason, like if we look at a forest, we tend to see that the forest is taking care of itself. Like we're not having to do a whole lot of work there. And so we as gardeners can kind of mimic soil conditions. For thousands of years, humans have tilled soil because tilling helps add air to the soil. It also kills a whole bunch of the natural microbial life and nematodes and other creatures that live in soil, and all of their dead bodies give a boost in the short term to plant growth. The problem is when you've tilled the soil, you've broken up a lot of these natural relationships of fungal filaments in the soil, and your plants no longer can get some of those benefits from the soil. So, there's lots of different ways to garden, but the way I garden and have had really good success is to not till my soil with like a rototiller. I will break up little bits of my soil right where I'm planting new seeds, but for the most part, I use no-till methods of agriculture where I copy the forest ecosystem, where a forest drops leaves and feeds the soil microbes from the top down. Worms come up and feed on decaying organic matter and help aerate the soil for me. So I put decaying animal bedding on my soil, or old straw that's or compost that's mixed with this, not quite completely composted, where it has some wood chips and stuff mixed in as a mulch on top of the soil, and that helps to feed the soil and keep it healthy. And so I think, again, what's most important to know is that compost has all of the nutrients the plant needs. Anytime you're adding compost or organic matter to soil, you're going to solve a whole bunch of different problems. If your soil's too heavy clay, compost will make it lighter and aerate it. If it's too sandy and the water is just draining through and not staying in the soil, adding compost will help retain water. And it also, compost or organic matter provides all of the nutrients the plant needs. And so, when we till the soil, it does give a quick burst of energy to plants and can work really well, but then we have to replenish the soil every year. And so there's definitely different philosophies on how to garden. And so I'm wanting to share, my philosophy of gardening. I can end up with a little bit more fungal issues, but I end up with, the plants that can survive in fungal rich soil do incredibly well. And so as a gardener, what I do is I plant a lot of different types of one plant. So like I really love cucumbers, for example. And if you love cucumbers, definitely that would be a plant that I'd recommend to try. You're more motivated to keep on gardening when you produce food that you really love. And cucumbers right off the vine are way better than cucumbers you can buy in the store. And so I usually will plant like 4 or 5 different varieties and plant them again like a month later after I first maybe plant my first cucumbers in May, and then I'll plant them again in June, and I'll get some that do really well. Because sometimes you'll have early pests that might get your early cucumbers that you plant in May, but then they leave, and then by June when your new cucumbers come up, then they can do really well. I mean, the other way to take care of pests is just having biodiversity, having lots of any plant in the onion family can help repel pests, as well as marigolds. So anyway, let me get on to some of the main reason you wanted me to talk to you tonight, which is to talk about how to turn our Northern Virginia soil into a gardening bed. And there's lots of different ways to do this. And so I'm just going to present a couple different options to you. One of the simplest things you could do is this year is put down some type of border, whether it be stone, like in my garden here, or raised beds, like in my garden to the right, where you put down wood, something to hold the soil. The nice thing about a raised bed is people don't walk in the soil then, or at least you make sure you tell people not to step in these raised beds, because you want your soil to be aerated, full of air, so the plant's roots can breathe. And so the simplest recipe is just to put down 12 inches of organic straw and then 3 or 4 inches of compost, and you can grow directly into that, and it doesn't require a lot of work, and you get some pretty good production out of a bed like that. Another way, you may start out in your yard with a grassy area. This is my son Jonathan, who wants to model the center of what became a new front yard gardening bed. Fairfax County now allows people to put a 100 square foot garden in their front yard. So if the only place that you have really good sun, like 6 hours or more of sunlight a day, is in your front yard, you can plant up to a 100 square foot front yard garden. And this is one way to do it. So I find a good sunny spot, a place that I've seen it has sun for 6 or more hours in the day. If I was just planting leafy greens, 4 hours would be enough. I made a border to get a nice circle. I used that one stake in the middle, put a rope out, and used the shovel and help create just a little bit of a border, digging around the edge. And through this, I've cut out a path, which is an option. Here, the soil is often really thin, the good topsoil. So I'm just taking that little bit of topsoil and adding it to this bed. And then as soon as possible, I cover it. And so in this case, I put down wood chips on the path. And then I used, this is a composted horse manure, which is full of nutrients and rich source of nitrogen. So I put that down right on top of the soil so it wasn't left bare too long. And then I knew that this grass is still sticking up around the edge, and some of this grass could still grow up through the horse manure. And so the next layer I put was cardboard. Now this is something you could do directly. I'm showing a little bit more complicated bed that I made, but you could put cardboard directly on top of grass and then put down compost and grow in that. And the advantage of doing a bed this way is that all of your grass then becomes it dies, it rots and feeds the soil. And those roots of the grass that were going into your soil become new pathways for worms and the new roots of your plants to grow into. So I put down the cardboard, fold it over at the edges, and then cover that with a couple more inches of compost. And usually the leaf compost that you can buy around here is mixed with wood chips, which then when exposed to the sun make a really nice little mulch, and it looks pretty attractive for like a front yard gardening bed. So you can see, just to save on labor, I backed my truck right up to there so I could just unload the compost directly onto the bed. And then I planted some herbs. One of the nice things about a lot of herbs like cilantro and rosemary and oregano and basil is that their strong flavors are amazing for our cooking, but deer don't like the strong flavors of herbs. And so they work really well if you have a lot of deer pressure. And then I added some other things. In this case, because it was a front yard bed, I was trying to choose plants that were decorative, nasturtium for nice flowers, artichokes, which have a beautiful flower, and okra in the back. And I've had some luck with okra some years not having any deer damage, but if the deer get hungry enough, they will nibble on artichoke and okra. I've never had them nibble on my garlic chives, which I'll show you in a little bit. But in this bed, the vision was to have like a yellow and purple theme, which was complementary colors. So you can garden in different ways to get a more attractive bed. And you can see here on the side, this bed looks different at different times of the year. This was taken, the bottom picture was taken in September when all the garlic chives were producing these really nice white flowers. So I did just include that because this is a really simple plant that you can buy. I know Edible Landscaping in Afton, Virginia sells them. And I think some of the other garden centers probably sell garlic chives. The nice thing is you have a really long season and you can eat any part of the plant. Typically, I just eat the leaves. I chop up the leaves into stir fries or salads. And it's a nice way to get some extra greens in your diet. And it's a perennial, so it comes back year after year. And then in the fall, you get these really nice, lovely white flowers. So I mentioned the front yard garden. This is in my backyard, an okra flower. And so okra is one of those examples of a plant that you may not have ever thought to grow. Maybe you didn't like okra because it's kind of slimy if you've ever had it like at a restaurant or somewhere. But my wife was amazed when we grew our own okra and harvested it right before putting it into a mill. it was absolutely delicious, and she liked okra. And so we were having okra in our spaghetti, okra in our eggs, okra in everything, because it was such an easy plant to grow in our climate. Okra does really well with our humidity, and it has the lovely flowers. Okay, so let's look at another recipe for planting. So one of the great things about planting recipes is that you can use lots of your yard scraps or decaying organic matter that you can find around your property, or back in, maybe if you have a little woods, access to private woods, or go on Craigslist and people are trying to get rid of rotten firewood. Lots of people will give you rotten wood. And rotten wood is a wonderful source of nutrients for plants, and it serves as a sponge soaking up nutrients. So we'll talk a little bit about, there's some key points, but let me show you my recipe for horticulture beds. I'm going to go through a basic recipe twice. I did this bed in 2 stages. And so first of all, I dug out the best topsoil until I started getting down to the clay, took out any rocks, I put those in a bucket, chopped up any roots that were entering the planting area and threw them in a pile, keeping all the good topsoil, and threw some grass on there to protect some of those microbes. And then my boys and I put in some old wood that was lying around the property. Some charred wood is great. You're sequestering carbon, and charred wood serves as a great host for beneficial microbes. And so you can mix those in. The key with wood is you don't want to use locust or cedar because they don't rot. You want wood that rots and becomes a nice sponge. The only other wood to not use is walnut that I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, pines don't take longer to rot too, so you might want to use pine. But then walnut has jugalone. So if you have a walnut tree around your property and are struggling to grow things, it's probably because jugalone is a poison that walnut trees produce. So I'm giving lots of different tips as we're going through here. I hope that's helpful. So then I put some more decomposed wood on the top, which will help further the rotting process and provide something immediately for roots to sink into. And then I put down some nitrogen-rich material, some manure. You can use grass clippings or just compost. And just to illustrate how well that works, I'd put a bunch of horse manure over an old tree stump in my yard. This has been a number of years ago. And then 2 years later, came back and the soil that I dug out of that pile was rich and black. And so I used it for some of my planting beds and replaced it with some clay that I pulled from another site. You can throw some of the clumps of sod to help hold it up. You can check the pH. If it's looking pretty acidic, you can add wood ashes or lime to get the pH up. It's pretty common in our county to have a low pH, and so it is helpful. Virginia Cooperative Extension provides free soil tests, or provides soil tests. That's not always free, but talk to Adria. She'll be coming on soon. And then, let's see, I added a layer of mulch on top, straw. Pictured here. I like to use veteran compost. It has like kind of wood chips in it. You can make a nice little compost for the bed. And so then on the back side of that bed, I did the same thing. I pulled all the topsoil over, and this is, if you wanted to keep the grass around a bed like this is how you could do it. Otherwise, you could just pile all the soil onto like a tarp or something off to the side. I was just illustrating how to do a bed in 2 stages. Without like messing up the grass. But then you'll see in my last slides, I actually dug up all that topsoil because I needed more good topsoil to make a really nice raised bed. So I put down some logs. Again, you don't want to use pine, locust, cedar, or walnut. I guess I did use pine chips under my blueberry beds, and they've done really well. So I guess pine can be used. The older the wood, the better. If it's rotting, that makes a wonderful source of nutrients for your plants. This is also a great way to fill up raised beds. If you don't want to buy a whole bunch of soil, you can use wood chips or old wood that's around your property. Like maple, oaks, a lot of the hardwoods and softwoods that we have here would be great wood. And then put the most decomposed wood on top. So I'm just kind of walking through this again, just showing how it works one more time. This time, instead of an herbivore manure, I put in a bunch of fresh green grass. Put down sod around the perimeter, topsoil on top. And so since I didn't have a lot of good soil, I dug up some more soil to make paths around the edge. And then I checked the pH with a little, you can buy one of these testers for $12 or so at a garden center. And it looked like it was almost 6.5. That's pretty good. So you didn't, you want to be, right around 6.5 to 7 is ideal for most plants, pH. So then I added mulch, and then one thing you can do at the beginning or at the end is add some type of edging. And so I put stone around that bed to make a nice edge. And then I started planting, used the soil cultivator to loosen right where I was going to put the seeds. And then I put in vermiculite on top of some lettuce seeds and grew some lettuce there that year that I made this bed. This bed's like 3 years old now. So, like broccoli doesn't do real well in huicoculture beds because it doesn't like more fungal rich soil, but most other plants do really well. I've always found it really helpful to cover the soil to prevent weeds, protect soil health, you reduce runoff, and then you feed the soil and the earthworms with mulches. And so that year, my son Jonathan is showing the bed was over there. He's showing some tomatoes he got from it. So you can grow things in that bed right away. Then last spring, I took a picture of that bed to show off actually the flowers and garlic. These are pansies. You can eat, they're edible pansies. And then they have cilantro and garlic. And these are mustard greens that were volunteers in that bed. I finished putting the stone in by then and built another bed. And I just took this picture today. This is what that bed looks like. It's got some garlic growing across it. I put my onions in. I've got another row of lettuce planted. I really need to get a picture of this bed when it's productive, but it's been a good bed for me. And then I have my potatoes back there and peas further back and onions planted. Oh yeah, I have onions in the side, on both sides that are just poking the tops of the onions are out of the soil right now. So you guys, as you can see, we're just getting started with the gardening season, so you got plenty of time to plant. Like there's a lot of things that I could not plant yet, like tomatoes. It's way too early because there's still going to be a frost, and Adria is going to talk more about that, and I'll be able to turn it over to her. Just before you think I'm a terrible gardener, I wanted to show off another one of my huicoculture beds with lettuce and edible roses. And can anyone figure out does anyone know what this yellow flower plant is? These are buttercups right here in front of my bed. I'd love to let buttercups grow up in my yard. But does anyone know what edible plant that is?
Mustard?
That is kale. A nice kale has these beautiful yellow flowers if you let it go to seed. And so there's another bed. And a little bit more about soil. Clay is actually very, very fine particles. The smallest particles become clay. They become so dense. And the largest particles in soil are sand. Medium particles are more what you want a mixture actually of all three: sand, clay, and loam. And that's the best soil. The other thing that I wanted to illustrate with this picture is you can see this is black compost. Compost is 50% carbon, and the more carbon or compost you add to the soil, the darker your soil will be and the healthier it'll be. So that's why gardeners really look for a really dark soil, and that's a sign of good health. And so you can take this Virginia clay and mix in organic matter like I was illustrating with some of my recipes, and you'll have wonderful fertile soil again, because that the key is to mix in. I even sometimes, like if I'm going to grow carrots, I'll mix in sand into my soil to help break it up too. Just like my kids' old play sand, I'll dump it into a bed and mix it in. All right, so if you're wanting to have less work, you don't have to grow everything that you're going to eat. Just having some herbs around your house, having some things that you like some fresh lettuce or something that you like that tastes a lot better than what you can buy in the store, such as tomatoes, is great. So you can always support other local regenerative agriculture. And perennial plants are the ones that come back year after year. They can be beautiful for front yards, like these Stelladora daylilies that are edible. You can add daylilies to salads as a fresh garnish. But sometimes I know for me it's hard, like I don't want to take away the beauty in my yard, but it is nice to have a beautiful salad with some flowers in it. If you're looking for something that can fruit and shade, our native pawpaw tree, this is something that would take 5 to 8 years after you plant it to fruit, but it's a lovely tree, and it can fruit and shade. And so I'm just throwing out a couple plants here. And my next slide is going to tell you how to get to a huge list of plants that I would suggest for front yards and edible landscaping. But Japanese plums are one of the easiest fruit trees for a beginner to grow. We have, if you have good sun, we haven't had to spray our plums at Daniels Run Peace Church at all, and they're fruiting really well each year. And so that would be a good tree to consider for a beginner gardener, because a lot of the other common fruits need sprays, unfortunately, or are more difficult to grow organically. But when I say sprays, they can be like clay surround spray. But this is one that we haven't had to spray and have had good production. And so the Fairfax County has this domain, fairfaxcounty.gov/food council/urban agriculture. And that website is currently undergoing a major renovation, but does still have some really great resources, and will soon have a whole lot more. We have a free tool library that we welcome you to rent tools from. There's a whole copy of my edible landscaping plants that I'd recommend if you're looking at easier plants to just put in and have production from year after year. And then we have a whole resource guides there on maintaining edible gardens. And then I know that the next workshop that's coming up, you can mark your calendars, is April 14th. We have a best-selling author, my friend Bree Arthur, is coming to talk about edible landscaping plants. And she has a ton of great energy and will be a lot of fun to listen to. So I will be back to, if there's any burning questions.
Corey, there's one soil related question that it might make sense for you to answer straight up.
Sure, that'd be great.
Great. It's where do you buy horse manure?
So there are several farmers here in Fairfax County that will give it to you for free. You just have to be willing to go and scoop it up yourself. I personally know a farmer that will come and give you 10 cubic yards, which is like way more than most home gardeners would want for $20 to $40. He'll deliver that to your place. So the best place though is just to go onto Craigslist, and usually there will be someone trying to give away horse manure. And what you want to look for is the back side of their pile or the bottom side of their pile where it's extra composted. That way you won't have as much of a smell, and you can put it on your plants right away. But there's lots of, I feel like every time I've gone on Craigslist and looked for free manure, I found some.
There was one more question as well. Someone was asking.
Can we also switch the screen?
Oh yeah, I'm so sorry. I'll stop the share because we're supposed to be switching the screen. Thanks, Adria.
Sorry.
So what was the last question?
Yeah, someone was also asking about organic straw, and I know it might be easy to confuse hay and straw. So maybe you can just talk a little bit to that.
Thank you, Kirsten. That's a great point. So hay often has the seeds still in it. And so when you put hay on your soil, you're going to end up with a grass field instead of a typical garden bed. You'll get a lot of weed seeds. So the more straw, you want to use straw, which doesn't have the seeds. And unless you love weeding and just start looking for an excuse to have more weeds to pull out. But, the whole point of mulching in my mind is to have a lot less weeds, because as soon as soil is exposed to sunlight, you're going to have, nature doesn't like to have bare soil. And so every weed seed that is in that soil will germinate as soon as you expose soil to sunlight. And so that's the advantage of putting some type of mulch down, is you get a lot less weeds, and it keeps the soil moist so you don't have to water as often. The other reason I was walking you through some of my horticulture beds is because they hold water, and so I rarely have to go out and do work watering my garden, because and the more organic matter you add to the soil, the more water capacity it will have, and the less often you'll have to water. And sorry, I saw another question pop across my screen, but it's 7:37, so I want to make sure talk more about watering and drainage. So you don't want, okay, I will say just a couple things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Adria, because she's got a really great presentation, and I want to give her time to do that. But if you dig into your clay only at one spot, and you can end up with a clay bowl that will hold water, and you're going to end up with root rot problems. And so it's really important that's one of the reasons we do raised beds, and I recommend raised beds, is that elevation of the bed up higher allows water to drain out the bottom, and so you don't end up with root rot. Because if you have plants sitting in water, they're going to get root rot and die. So that's, I think, the most important point there. And then young seedlings, actually, if you water really regularly, the roots don't develop as deep. And so what I like to do is actually wait to water my plants until I see any sign of stress. So I try to go out to my garden every day, but I don't water every day, because the more I water, the more the plants just rely on that surface water instead of sinking their roots deeper into the soil. And so what you can do, I mean, if you see any signs of the plant looking stressed, like it's starting to wilt at all, you need to get water on there. And then when you do water, you want to water heavy, like a full inch of water, if possible, around the plant. The other way you can check to see if the soil is getting too dry is put your finger an inch deep or so into the soil. And if it's really dry that far down, that's another sign that it might be time to water. So I hope that was helpful, and I'm going to turn it over to Adria, because she's going to answer a lot more questions, and then we'll both be back to answer your questions at the end of her presentation. Take it away, Adria.
All right, thanks, Corey. That's right. We're going to come back and have an extended question and answer time. We promise that. So we'll stay as long as you need to answer questions. My name's Adria Bordas. I'm your county extension agent, and I'm really happy that you're here with us tonight. I have been a gardener since I was growing up as a kid, just like Corey. I gardened a lot with my grandparents and with my parents, and we had a vegetable garden in the backyard. Grew up in New Jersey, so there's a lot of gardens in New Jersey. New Jersey is known as the Garden State. And so we had a huge garden when I was growing up, and as a teenager, I remember really enjoying it with my grandparents as well. So I absolutely agree. It is something fun you can do. And to kind of lead on to that is, you know, during this pandemic, it was just this time last year that Corey and I decided to have our first virtual food council talk, which was this talk that we hosted, and we had like 70 some people. It was amazing. And what I will say is that COVID made a lot of people into gardeners. And we hope that you're here tonight to get good ideas on gardening, how to start it right, or maybe some things and some tips that maybe you didn't know last year you're going to learn, or you learn as you went along, and you're going to learn a lot more as you go along. But we want to encourage you to keep going with that garden hobby that you picked up, this healthy habit that you picked up as a gardener, so to speak. So the first thing is if you had a garden last fall and it's now spring and it looks like this, and you have weeds and you have maybe some leftover cucumbers or squash or a vine that was there from last year, tomorrow is a great day to go out there and clean it up. You want to make sure, and this is one tip that I give to gardeners from season to season, I try, just like Corey, this area has such an extended growing season that you could practically garden 4 seasons here. And so this raised bed that was abandoned through the winter, which is fine, at least what I would have done is I would have put a little bit of mulch on this, maybe planted some peas or some cover crops or something just to protect the soil, and so that you didn't have space for the weeds to invade early season and to create more work for yourself. If you put something like a cover crop, some peas, some winter wheat or something like that, you could turn it in to the soil and have a living manure, a living mulch, right? So, so my tip is go out there and clean it up as soon as you can. If you still have tomato vines from last year, go on out there and get them cleaned up as well. If you first, for some reason, want to start today and you need to dig near your house, you want to call Miss Utility and get them to mark your area, or if it's a school, or if it's a community center or any center, before you dig, you've got to call, at least know where your utilities are around your house and around the facilities that we're responsible for, if it's a county facility. Find a site for the garden that is 6 to 8 hours of full sunlight. The more sunlight, the better. In those poor sunlight areas and those shadier areas, you're gonna have more of a chance to grow herbs and other greens, but you're not going to get your tomatoes and your peppers growing in places that are 4 hours of sun or say 5 hours of sun. You truly need that 8 hours of sun. Think about what you like to eat. Like Corey said, I love to eat sweet potatoes. I love green beans. My family loves green beans. I love peas. Stacey Evers does not like peas, but I love peas. And so I grow peas for me, for my wife, for my family members, for my friends, and my dogs. My dogs love peas. But the thing is grow what you like, right? Proximity to water source, it's gonna be heavy if you have to carry water across. I saw somebody carrying six jugs of water across the road the other day, across Woodburn Road, going from the community center to the apartments to get water. So remember your proximity to water source. And then what are your ultimate goals? Do you wanna just have a 1-season garden, just warm season, or winter veggies, or what do you wanna grow? Do you wanna eat your yard? Because some people, that was their goal in COVID, right? And so just think about that and make a plan. So test the soil. Corey talked about testing the soil. He has a little pH tester. Virginia Tech does soil tests. Many people have asked me, why doesn't the county test soil? The equipment that Virginia Tech has that is going to test your soil are, really big machines that'll fill this whole room that I'm in, or $100,000 to $1,000 machines. So we send the soil down to Virginia Tech. Right now, it's about a week that it will take. And if you send it in and email us, we can look up the answers for you and find out how long it's going to take. Know if you're going to grow in the ground, in containers or raised beds. I have had success with all kinds of gardens here in Virginia that are either growing in the ground or even in little pots and of course in raised beds. Corey talked about doing a lot of layering or lasagna gardens. Some people call this lasagna gardening, right? And it's not just Italians that do lasagna gardening. All gardeners do lasagna gardening. It's just adding all of those ingredients and building your soil. I increased my garden, my raised beds last year during COVID. And I did just exactly as Corey described. I did a lot of putting rotten wood in the bottom of the beds to increase drainage and just not have to fill it up with so much. I use compost. I purchased compost from Veterans Compost and filled it up with other things as well. And it turned out great. So, okay, about our freeze dates, your last freeze dates. And Corey smiled when the first thing that said, check your last frost date, because the last frost date typically around here is around April 20th to April 30th. But But hold your breath, gardeners. Last year, we still had a freeze. It was like May 12th and then something around May 19th. Okay. And we hardly ever get freezes around that time. And it fried a lot of our tomatoes that maybe you tried to pop in early at the end of April or that first weekend of May, and then we got a freeze. So just be ready to protect something outside with frost fabric or other little plant cloches or something if we're going to get a freeze, if you have something. So this picture is a little bit better right here, and I'm sorry for the fuzziness, but I was trying to blow it up. If you're in the tidewater area, that means this line right here directly kind of cuts through our county. So the eastern portion of the county, south and eastern portion of the county is going to have their average last frost date of April 10th to April 21st. And the Piedmont area is just going to be a little bit later, April 20th to April 30th. And I know Corey is kind of right around this area, and so am I. And sometimes you will get that late frost. And sometimes if you look at the average first frost date, we won't have a first frost until well past Thanksgiving, sometimes well into November. And that was the case this year. So just kind of know your thing and your time frame. And what you need to do to really figure this out is looking at your seed packets and being able to count back from those dates or counting forward from those dates and being able to have some leeway in there to predict. As far as physical requirements and temperature goes and things, right now we are in the cool season crop time. And as much as it was warm last week and I was wearing shorts almost every day and outside and doing a lot of work and my body feels alive because I got out to garden and put my hands in the soil, it will still get cold. So we're not going to put in any tomatoes or any cucumbers or any beans. Right now it's peas, spinach, lettuce, beets, Swiss chard, brassicas. Brassicas are broccoli, cauliflower, mustard greens, bok choy, things like that. This is my cauliflower that I grew last year. It was the first time I grew cauliflower here in Virginia. Otherwise, I had grown it in California, where it is commonly grown in the Salinas Valley. And I was so proud. We got 6 huge heads, but they will tolerate a frost. And I have them out in my yard right now uncovered. So you don't need to have things covered up. The warm season crops that start when the evening temperatures climb above 50 degrees. And that means air temperatures, okay? And we're gonna talk about soil temperatures in a second, but this is air temperatures. And for some gardeners have weather stations in their garden. Some gardeners have little thermometers, little things that they are able to pull up an app on their phone. I felt fancy because I put a thermometer and a something to measure humidity in my seedling room right here where my office was. So I was getting all fancy this year. These warm season crops will be killed by frost. So again, beans, tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, cucurbits like cucumber, squash, pumpkins, and corn, all of those, if you were to plant too early, you would end up with them killed by frost or damaged by frost, and then more susceptible to disease later on. When you do a soil test, and I know Corey talked about this, soil test kits, just so you know, if you want one, Stacy Evers has them, I have them, we can mail one to you from our office, from our house. We could also, the libraries, all 23, I think, libraries, maybe more, have soil test kits. You can still get them during the curbside pickup. All Merrifield Garden Centers, Fairfax Ace Hardware, Hollywoods and Vine in the South County area, as well as Campbell and Ferrara in Alexandria, and then also Brown's Hardware in Falls Church. So there's a lot of places where you can pick them up. It's only $10. And then if you send it in, you can kind of manage your soil as you go along. And if you make big changes, then I would suggest just testing that area again. Every two or so years, you can test your soil. This chart just shows you something that I just want to kind of highlight. If you can see it without all of this here, this thumbnail picture, I'll get this out of the way. This right here, this section, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, all of this is in perfect numbers. And that's what Corey was showing you with that 6.5 that he was striving for with his raised beds. This is where all of the nutrients are going to be available to the plants. So sometimes when people get their soil test back and the results back, they ask me, well, why, and they have a 6.5 pH. Why does it say magnesium very high? Well, your magnesium should be very high if it's in that pH range. You want it to be high. You want your calcium, your sulfur, your potassium, your phosphorus, all to be high. And so it's just those, sometimes when people get a soil test back and they see the results, they are worried when they see things very high or very low. And if it's in the right pH range, that's where you're hitting the mark. Okay. So I want to highlight a little bit about VCE resources. Just right now, during the last year, Virginia Cooperative Extension updated their home vegetable gardening page. So this is the website, and this website is gonna be on the next 3 slides so that you can write it down, and someone will be very generous and likely put it in the chat box for you. But it's ext.vt.edu/lawn-garden/home vegetables. And you're going to land on this page that says home vegetable gardening, and there's information on how to get in touch with your local master gardener group. But then as you scroll down in the page, you'll notice that each of these tabs, like planning your garden, preparing your garden beds, small space gardening, crop specific guides, all of these will open up to another section with many publications referenced. So you'll be able to click on those and get ideas, other ideas for home gardeners, also processing and sharing your crops with others, canning ideas. So this is all of the resources in just one space for vegetable and fruit gardening. Okay, and last but not least, they usually have a nice little section that has what are the specific plants to grow and seed in specific months. So this was from February. So I'll be honest with you, in zone 7A, you could do this in March. This says beets, collards, kale, mustard, onion, let's see, peas, radish, and spinach. And each month they put that up on the website, and they also add it to their Facebook page. So it's just lots of resources. We spent a lot of time during the quarantine kind of bringing up some of these resources for the public, so I hope you enjoy them. Okay, so seedlings, what you need to start your seeds, okay? Containers, some labels, some seed starting mix, and a warm, sunny, or good light spot. Now, I have a neighbor who starts their seeds in a warm spot in their house, but then has a great window, like a bay window on the south side of their house, and that's where they grow their seedlings, and they don't use grow lights like you see behind me. So you can buy these things, like these little discs that grow when you put them in water, like peat pots, these little things that you plant right into the soil. Or you can also buy little seedling starts like this, or you could reuse or recycle things like yogurt cups. People have used toilet paper rolls where they cut them in half and fold them down, and they have something that would be plantable like this. Others use newspaper presses. There's things like that you can make a little seedling cup out of a new piece of newspaper and then be able to plant that. What's good for those plantable peat pots and newspaper press type pots is that if you have a plant that is very sensitive to transplanting, you plant the whole thing and then that newspaper or the toilet paper roll or peat pot just breaks down in the soil. These little things, if you put them in the soil, this plastic little netting ends up in your soil. So just remember that. I've had very good success with yogurt cups and other things like berry containers, and I'll show you in a little bit on that. As far as vegetable seeds go, sometimes there are a lot of people who have free seeds and free seeds like myself and Stacy making available to the public and for edible gardens. And then if they're older seeds, those seeds, they might be 3 years old or 5 years old, the viability of those seeds, you might question them, okay? So on this Seeds for the Garden publication, and you can find that on the website that I just showed you all, they have a publication 426316 that has a list of generally the number of years that those seeds would be viable after the seed date is no good. So seeds are dated. I have a packet in front of me from 2018 and it's fine. I can still grow from it. But there are some seeds that we want to just kind of give you a little heads up that aren't really good if they're longer than a certain number of years, like onion and parsley. I've used peppers longer than 2 years old and spinach peppers longer, and tomatoes, all of those spinach, tomatoes and peppers much longer than that time frame right there. One of my tips for sprouting seeds and trying to see if they are viable is you could take just a couple and put them in a paper towel, a wet paper towel, not dripping wet, just moist, damp paper towel, and put them in a little bit of plastic container or a yogurt cup and keep it moist, and then they will sprout in that paper towel, and then you'll know if the seeds are viable or not. Remember, seeds don't need light to sprout. They need moisture and warmth first. It isn't until they sprout that they need the sunlight, okay? As far as seed starting mixes go, I think the biggest thing that I need to impress upon you all is there are a lot of different mixes out there. And we did a talk a few years ago. Corey asked me to talk about different seed mixes and which ones work the best. I think we need to first start out with is just remember sterile seed mix is really important because these seeds are babies and they're sterile too. They're not, you know, they don't have soil on them or anything. And when they're young, they're very fragile. So they're going to need something that they can grow with their very fine little root hairs and attach to. And then once they're stronger, that's when you can plant them outside and they're tougher and that they'll be able to handle the soil outside. But right now, a lot of times, some of these seed mixes, and I don't like any brand over the other, to be honest with you. It's just a matter of, do they drain well? Okay, and that's really important. Corey talked about making holes in the bottom of cups and stuff. If you're going to use yogurt cups, I make holes in the bottom, a little slit in the bottom, but it's got to drain well. And so when you're making and using these little containers, make sure that you moisten that dry potting mix, that soilless mix with some water about a day ahead of time before potting. And this is because you want that to kind of take up the water and feel like a damp sponge, but not be completely drenched and dripping with water. On recycle containers, as far as they go, I collect them all year round. I get in trouble a little bit, like, do we really need all these containers? You know, I have a little bin that I keep in my tool room on the side, and then it's my go-to for when I'm ready to start plants. And I have different things that I like to start in different type containers. Wash those containers with soap and water, hot soapy water or bleach, 10% bleach solution, and then poke some holes in the bottom. Try to use the same type of container for all the same kind of seedlings, meaning if you have, say, all of a specific yogurt type container, a specific cup, use all of your tomatoes or all of your peppers in the same kind of container. That way, the same soil volume is going to be watered at the same time. And then you'll be able to have a knack for the watering. The watering of seedlings takes a little bit of practice. And I often, at first, will use a little spritz bottle like this. And at first, I started out with like the little dollar store, little play like hairspray container. Just get yourself something that's a little bit bigger, because you're going to run out of water and have to go back and refill it. Okay. Let's see. So can you go outside and use garden soil? That is not sterile. It holds, you're gonna find that seed starting mix is gonna hold water, the right ideal growing conditions for seedlings. When you start messing around with mixing it with the soil from outside and bringing it inside, you can also bring in pests, you can bring in insects, you can bring in fungus gnats and other things. So, and watering is really important, because if you overwater, some of the seed mixes will enhance fungus gnat populations, okay? So when I first moved into a bigger house, I wanted to have a little seedling area, and this was in our mud room, okay? And I still use this area. What I use this area for right now, because I've learned a lot more, is for hardening off, because this mud room is not heated. So if I wanted to start seedlings in this area of my house and it's not heated, it's just a little offset mud room from the back of my house, and it gets much colder. I keep a thermometer in there, and it gets roughly down to 50 degrees at night on a cold night. And you would need to use some kind of heat pad for seedlings to get them started if you wanted to get something like peppers or tomatoes started. I use this area right now as like a little holding area if I'm hardening off seedlings and I want to bring them back in at night to keep them warm on a cold night. I also use this as a place where I hold over tropicals in the winter as well. One of my other tips is saving some of these larger kind of salad mix containers that you might buy. I like to use them for a lot of different things, and I'm holding one up as well. They're great for humid chambers to create a little bit of a micro environment to start your seedlings in, and I'll show you as we get along in the talk how I'm doing that. But I save these and wash them out and stack them up and just keep them dry and clean throughout the season. When I'm not growing seedlings, I'm also thinking ahead for the next season. So when you get your seed packets, because a lot of us, I know I learned that a lot of people went out and bought a lot of seeds in the beginning of COVID last year, and learning a lot about the seed packets and reading them. A lot of different seed packets, different brands have great information, and some have recipes, and some have very little information at all. And they're expecting you as a gardener to have that experience or that knowledge and to just know how to plant this seed. So for example, you want to read the whole seed packet front and back. It gives me a good idea of the seedling depth that I want to plant the seeds at, 1/8 of an inch, and the plant space is 12 inches. So that means each seed is going to be 12 inches apart, and rows are going to be 15 inches apart. It tells me that it's going to sprout in 7 to 14 days and will mature. This is a mesclun zesty salad lettuce mix in 45 to 70 days. This seed count has approximately 1,000 seeds in this packet, okay? So if this was a seed, if I were to plant all this out at 12 inches and a 15-inch row space, 1,000 seeds, that's a really large area in my backyard. I would likely use this packet about 3, 4, 5 times and plant every 2 weeks starting now until it really gets hot, okay? And that's what I would do with lettuce. And you could even plant lettuce in shadier areas if you have the space. But some seed packets will tell you that you need to soak seeds overnight. Like I typically will soak my peas overnight and my beans because it'll help them get more hydrated. Some seed packets will say that you need to scarify your seed. That means either damage the seed coat by using a little nail file or a little emery board, or even putting it in the refrigerator for a period of time to help that seed coat break open. I talked a little bit about starting seeds in a moist paper towel. So what are some of these things mean? When you sow seeds, that means that you're sprinkling seeds, you're planting seeds. It's really easy to be heavy-handed with seeds. So I find that I will take them out of the packet first and put them in another container, a small little dish or little plastic container, so that I'm controlled because I'm heavy-handed with seeds. And then I'll plant those so that I know, okay, this is how much I want to plant this time, instead of dumping the whole packet in your hand and then going, oh no, what do I do? So make sure that you kind of have a process that you're going to go through when you're working with your seed packets. When it comes to thinning the seeds, that means really pulling some out or cutting them back so that they will not compete against each other. And I'll just stop right here and say that here's a good example. And I don't know if y'all can see this in my little camera, but you can see this almost lawn of basil. This is Thai basil, and right next to it, I transplanted some cilantro, and they were in a similar container, the cilantro. I transplanted them into these cups and I planted them outside. They're fine. These guys have been like this lawn of Thai basil, these little microgreens, for about 2 weeks now because I didn't transplant them. I wanted to show you purposely what happens to them. They compete against each other. And so they really do want to be thinned for them to thrive and grow. Okay. And that's what we mean, pulling them out. When they're like this small, you can transplant them a little bit bigger into other cups, and then they will thrive a lot better and they won't have any competition for moisture, nutrients, and light. Okay, so starting seeds indoors, enough warmth first. Once you get about 50% of the seeds germinating or sprouting, then move into the light. You don't have to have light immediately. You might need light within a week for these plants. Some seeds are gonna do better at a temperature for germinating, and that's really important. We're gonna talk about in a second. But you can use seed mats or a warm place in the house. So for example, I was telling Corey, when I'm really not busy growing a lot of seeds, I will not use my seed mats as much. And I'll just use the heat off of some of the lights that are coming off of my light stand here. And that way I'm not plugging in something else or what have you. If you don't have a seed mat and you want a warm place in the house to germinate your seeds, just kind of look around. Maybe there's a spot on top of the refrigerator or another area in your house that stays warm. Maybe you have a location near a heat vent that will do really well. Starting the seed ideas, there's just so many ways of starting seeds that people will do. And I have a friend whose mom loves to grow pumpkins. So for example, pumpkins, you start them around July 4th. But there's not much things warm, if you think about it, in your house on July 4th because you have the air conditioner on. So she uses the top of her refrigerator as a warm spot to germinate those seeds. Okay, so seeds that will do better at certain soil temps. You know, for example, some seeds are just going to sit there until it's warm enough or cool enough to grow. So if you are planting lettuce seeds and it's really hot in your garden, those in the summer months, but you want to try to grow some fall lettuce, you know, you can either plant them in a shady area or wait until it's cool enough for them to actually grow. There's these seed heat mats. Like I said, I have had success with them. Sometimes they can get pretty hot and you realize how fast they will get really quickly. I suggest a thermostat or a timer for them so that you only have the heater on for a certain period of time. You can use little timers like this or some other setup. You can also get a soil thermometer and stick that in your soil to see what temperature the soil is. So reasons why seeds don't sprout. And a lot of times I get questions from people say, well, my lettuce didn't sprout or my tomatoes aren't sprouting in the soil. And it could be that you planted them too deeply. You may have planted them in too cold or too warm of soil. There could be extremes in watering. Maybe you went away on a ski trip vacation and you had some seedlings going on and you forgot to water them, or your friend who was going to come over and watch the house forgot to water them for you. That could be a problem. If a seed starts to sprout and then it doesn't have the water to complete that germination process, it'll die. Birds and squirrels are a lot of our challenges, and humans, and. A lot of times we have challenges with poor quality seed if the seed might be too old. And also if your soil is not fine enough. I have found, and there is a lot of validity to what Corey was saying with the vermiculite on top. It's a fine, light product that the seeds can then grab a hold of and grow onto. What I did last year is I took an old mesh bag and put some compost in it and did almost like kind of fine sifted the compost and put that on top of some of my beds. And those beds had better seed sprouting than the beds that I didn't do that to. Okay, so here's just a few examples of optimum growth range, temperature, and how many days it's going to take. So those beans, those green beans that you're going to plant, they really like the warm soil, 65 to 85 degrees outside, and they're going to germinate within 5 to 10 days, maybe even sooner. Lettuce loves soil that is 50 to 65 degrees. And those days where if you're going to put it in direct seed into the soil with lettuce, it'll take, you know, roughly 7 days to see those little seedlings popping up, and start to thin them out as you see them pop up. If they're too close to each other, start to pull them out. You can use those microgreens in your salad. I've been eating this Thai basil, putting it in salads, putting it in marinades. It doesn't go to waste. It's just a good example of how things happen to plants if we don't do the right things, the right behavioral things of what they need, right? Sweet potatoes. There are a few people who asked me about sweet potatoes earlier on. Typically, they like about 65 to 85 degrees Celsius. I usually set them out, Fahrenheit. Usually they like I usually do about 70 degrees. So, I mean, I sprouted this about a couple weeks ago. Number of weeks to transplant, you want that transplant to be at least 5 to 6 weeks old. It could certainly be older. It's okay if it's older. But you want to put that transplant out when the soil temperature reaches that range. So not only the air temperature, but the soil temperature as well. You can always increase the soil temperature by raising the beds, adding compost to the soil. Having healthy microbes in the soil are also going to keep the soil warmer. So there's a few tricks there. Things that you want to avoid transplanting, meaning you don't want to use starter plants. I find that these things listed here, beans, carrots, corn, cucumber, melon, okra, peas, and squash, usually do well planted with the seeds directly into the ground. A lot of times people have challenges with squash and squash vine borer. Early season, you don't have to worry about planting squash. They are tropical plants. They love it when it's hot here. And there's some that do really well if you wait until the beginning of June to plant them. As far as your garden and setup, and this goes for raised beds and even some of your container gardens, the best that you are able to do, you want to put, if it's a raised bed or any kind of garden, have that set up north-south, because then you can orient it so that you can get the most amount of sun from east to west. If you have container gardens or pots or anything that you choose to do that, try to put it on the south or southwest side of your house so you get the most amount of sun. Okay, spend time looking where the sun comes up. Okay, of course, it's going to come up in the east, go down in the west, and how it travels across your yard. One of the master gardeners had a great tip one day. They talked about putting out pieces of paper tacked in their yard and writing down the time that that paper received sun. So they had an idea of how the sun traveled throughout the yard, or throughout however you're going to situate the garden, whether if it's a faith community or a school. This is basically what you want to do. Go outside, be observant. This is the time of year to do that. You're still teleworking, working from home, or having some idea. If not, on the weekend, look where the sun comes up, where it comes down, and how it travels across the space that you plan to grow your garden. In a container, you are going to be limited on size. So if you want to grow a tomato, like an heirloom tomato, or even a cherry tomato, you want to have the best, biggest size pot that you think you need. Something that is 18 inches or more around and at least 18 inches high for a tomato. You want to make a mix of sand and potting soil mix and compost. You can add in some vermiculite or some kind of humus or other organic matter. You want to make sure you get a good combination of drainage and moisture. When you're squeezing the soil, you want it to hold together, but you don't want to squeeze water out of it, and you don't want it to crumble apart in your hands. You want it to stay together, sort of, be crumbly, but you know, have good drainage and not end up having something that's going to be holding the water. If you're using containers and you're using decorative containers, because I have found that people will go to box stores and they want to have, you know, decorative looking containers and pots on their patio, just make sure that you have a space for that water to drain. That is super, super important. And some of these containers that we purchase throughout the different season, you might find that they don't have very good drainage. And that's really, really important for all of these vegetable plants, or they will rot and die of root rot. Okay, so be prepared. Have your soil mixtures, have some mulch, have some other things, have your containers. Make sure your containers are clean and ready to go. When you're ready to transplant, you don't want to be doing little things while these little plants are waiting to go in. and they're still, you know, a prisoner to this little cup. You know, it's been in there for how many months, or so to speak. When it comes time to hardening off seedlings, and I know, Stacy, you had mentioned that someone's having a hardening off workshop, and maybe you want to put that info in the chat box, but you want to harden off your seedlings over the course of about a week to 2 weeks. This is for warm season crops, things like tomatoes and peppers, things, you know, that you grew inside, or they were grown in a greenhouse at a warmer temperature, but it's not warm enough to go out in the evening. It's cold in the evening, but it's warmer in the day. When you go to set it out in the day, make sure that you're not setting it in this windy, sunny spot, but of course not in the shade. And I say it like this, like they are the Goldilocks right now. They, you know, it's too big, or it's too small, or, you know, it wasn't comfortable. These seedlings are still babies, so they're going to be the Goldilocks of all your plants, and you want to make sure that you take care of them and that you give them the best situation possible. So setting them out in the sun and wind to whoop around all day long can be challenging for them. So you want to put them in a protected area and bring them in the evening. Gradually, when evenings are above 50 degrees, you can leave them outside. Another tip that I forgot to mention, folks, is when you're growing these seedlings inside, one of my tips is, and you can't see it from here, but I have a box fan in this room. And when I start to grow seedlings, I turn that sucker on medium, and it is whooping in here. And I have sometimes another fan that I have growing in a different direction, because you want that simulation. And if you see me, I'm bobbing my head back and forth in the camera, but you kind of want that simulation of the wind so that that seedling doesn't grow so tall towards your lights. And this is very simply done by buying a little clip fan or a little small little desk fan or something if you have a small area, but that's super important. Having your lights only about 2 to 3 inches above the plants and having that fan on will keep your tomatoes nice and short and stout. And that's the way you want them. You don't want them very tall and ateliated, because that's where they're going to get weak and really spindly, and they're going to break when it's time to plant them. And that's where I think a lot of times gardeners get frustrated when they start to go to that next level of growing their own seedlings. And having the fan on and having the light down really on the seedlings, and maybe you end up having to actually raise up by putting a book or something under the seedlings so that they're raised up closer to that light, if you see what I mean. Okay, early season and late season, I use a lot of this fabric, and it's called frost protection fabric, or rime, or horticultural fabric. You will be able to gain at least 5 to 6 degrees depending upon the fabric. Some are very thin, and you just are getting bug protection and a few degrees. Where thicker fabric, you can get up to 6 degrees, 7 degrees protection. So that means if it goes down to 23 degrees, your plants feel like it's maybe 29 outside, okay, or 28. That is really important if you're keeping things over the winter. And this was my first garden bed when I lived in a townhouse. Get a sip of water. And I had this raised bed, and I put this fence around it to keep my dogs from jumping in and digging. But then I had these little bamboo stakes that I would keep the fabric just kind of draped over it like a little growth tunnel. And it did fantastic. We had all kinds of things, radishes and all kinds of beets during the winter months, and all kinds of greens. And then we would switch it over to a few tomatoes and peppers. A few people asked me some questions about spacing and how many plants you can get in a 4x4 bed. I had a few questions like that came in because a few of you submitted questions in advance on email. And what I will say is you've got to look at the plant tag. if that tomato plant says that you need 18 inches on either side of it, it will be a monster by the end of the season, and you'll need all of that 18 inches, and you'll be happy that that you have it. But just know that if you don't give your plants enough space, they'll just be diminished and maybe won't produce as much. And you have to kind of regulate your expectations, okay? As far as how to reach us and just the kind of reminders that we're your local resource, use reliable internet resources. And the reason why I say this is a lot of people will use Google to Google something. And if you just Google green beans, you'll get all kinds of information about green beans. But maybe you want to know what green beans Virginia Tech or Maryland recommend, then put .edu after that search, and then you will get a better unbiased research-based answer from your local extension programs. Some of the programs that I talked about earlier, like our all veggies every Monday at lunchtime, you can find those on fairfaxgardening.org. That's our Master Gardener website, and they have the registration for that. There's also, for those who have questions about lawns, they have a lawn program on Wednesdays called Lunch and Lawn, and they answer questions about lawn care and keeping your lawn green and making sure the chest bay is staying free of nutrients and healthy as well. So one of my last slides, and this is just to share, my nieces came over. I think this was from November, and this was to kind of show Corey that that, you know, the frost, try to remember when the frost was, it was certainly, this was November 3rd or 4th, because it was right around Election Day that they came over. And this is my niece Ava and my niece Olivia. This is my wife Angie. And the two of them came and helped us dug these sweet potatoes that day. We had more to dig, but they were excited. I will say that digging sweet potatoes for young kids is one of the most exciting things. You have loose soil, and it's like a treasure hunt, right? And one of my favorite vegetables as a kid always was sweet potatoes and butternut squash. And I always grow a lot of that. But they got to have enjoy the fun of digging them up this year. I don't know why they make those faces. And then here's our cauliflower this past year. My dog Pickles is one of our pest control, so to speak, squirrel control extraordinaire and chipmunk control here. And here's my phone number to the office, the main number to our office right now. Actually, I'll say leave a message, because we're not there every day, but we answer our phone every day. That's what I say. And then here's my email address, abordis@vt.edu. And I'm happy to answer questions. And we went super long. And Corey, we promised an extended Q&A. So maybe we should talk about that.
Yeah, I've been busy trying to answer questions in the chat. I've got one last one I think I have to hit to Kioma, and then I'll have answered those questions. But we would invite anyone to turn off their, wave their hand at us, and we can unmute yourself. You can ask a question in person if that's helpful, or but we'll try to do it one at a time. Lisa, did I see a hand? Or oh no, Christina Chang, did you want to ask a question? Unmute yourself. No, okay, you're just touching something on your screen. Okay. Does anyone have a question they want to ask? We're happy to answer. I'm about to put George French as the horse farmer who has all the manure. I was going to put his contact information, but he will only deliver 10 yards at a time. So this is only if you have a big space that can handle like basically a giant dump truck load of manure dumped all at once. But I will put his name here in the chat in just a sec. That's what I was just doing.
One of my other tips, Corey, is, before COVID, we traveled a lot more, and we would collect these little shower cap things. And you can use that as a little moisture chamber when you're growing your seedlings. So, you know, there's all little things that you can do to reuse, recycle. You know, you don't have to go out and spend a bunch of money on things. I use a lot of berry containers that, yeah, you know, we have, here's, I don't know if you can see this.
That's a great point, Adria. You know, gardening can be as inexpensive or as expensive as you want to make it. I mean, you can
Absolutely.
pay a professional stonemason to build beautiful stone raised beds for you, or you can use some free logs that you pick up on Craigslist to make a border around the garden.
That's right.
Saw a really good question here about fertilizing seedlings.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, so fertilizing seedlings is really helpful. And one of the things that's really easy to do is to make a simple compost tea, where you basically just soak a little bit of compost in water. I mean, there's recipes that make it more complex where you add like sugar and try to feed the microbes, but just a really simple compost tea where you put some compost in the water and then pour that black water over your seedlings can work really well to help fertilize and feed them if your potting soil doesn't have a lot of fertilizer in it. Or, I mean, especially if your seedlings have like colors, like if you see any sign of nutrient deficiency, like it's turning a little bit yellow or a little purple, something that's not supposed to naturally have those colors, then a compost tea can really help a lot. And then someone was asking about eggshells, I saw. Eggshells are a wonderful source of calcium. And you know, one of the reasons tomatoes sometimes get the black blossom end rot is because they're calcium deficient. And so I always try to mix in some crushed eggshells in the soil when I plant my tomatoes. The other really great secret for tomatoes is, you know, most perennial plants, you would never want to bury the root flare when you plant the plant because you can end up causing disease or insect damage right around where you're burying the plant. But there are a few exceptions, and tomatoes are one of those plants where you can actually bury the whole stem and some of the leaves in the soil. And so I don't know if anyone noticed some of the pictures of my tomato plants that were like taller than 8 feet. I had some that were about 10 feet tall this past year. And the way I get that type of height is, you know, animal manure, eggshells, and burying and a lot of compost, and then burying the whole plant in the early spring so that you know, the stalk of the young tomato plant will actually then sprout roots. And that also helps, especially like tomatoes can get kind of leggy or they reach up tall early on. And so burying them deeper can really help strengthen their root structure. And then I almost never have to water my tomatoes in our climate because of how deep the roots already are with that technique. No.
That has a question.
Yeah, Ava?
I was wondering if either of you ever make seed tapes. I was in a program where the woman took toilet paper and a flour water mixture and put seeds down and then used a seed tape to make sure that there was enough moisture and contact of the seed in the soil and things didn't fall down too far.
I have never made seed tapes, Corey.
No, that's not something that I have experienced.
No.
I'm sorry.
I did try winter sowing this year. I did some winter sowing of different plants that I find that are really hard to grow seedlings inside. And so somebody said something about, should I plant spinach outside? You can directly plant spinach outside right now and into the soil that you have outdoors. That's not something that I grow starts for inside. I just direct seed outside.
Yeah. There's a lot of crops I find do better direct sowing outside. The reason we can't start seedlings early inside is to get an earlier harvest, especially like tomato plants and pepper plants that have, an 80 to 100 day time period between when you plant the seed and when the first fruits come. If you want to have a lot of production, you want to start those inside early in the spring. Debbie Porter, I see your hand is up. Do you have a question we can answer?
I do. I was wondering, Adria, could you share the VCE website for the home vegetable garden information again?
Oh yeah, I can put that slide up. I'll put that up.
Or else just put it in the chat,
I can put that in the chat. Let me do
because
that.
I didn't have a pen before.
You got it. Sorry, no worries. There you go, Kristen's got it for you.
Oh,
Thank you,
great. Thank
Kristen.
you.
How
Yeah.
often should you water things outside? Seedlings outside, like if you planted something, say cauliflower or broccoli or something, until it gets established, meaning maybe about a week or two, I would plant it, I would water it every 2 to 3 days if you don't get rain. And this is a good opportunity. There are rain gauges you can buy and put a little rain gauge out there to measure the rain. I started a garden journal, a little bit more serious garden journal last year, and really measured the rain, wrote down the temperature, wrote down the amount of rain each day, so that it gave me a better understanding of what my soil and how much moisture I'm really going to need. And you'll sticking your finger in, like Corey said, that is a really good moisture meter. Any other questions?
So there was a question about where do you get compost? And so compost is something that you can make at home. There's lots of different resources and books on how to make compost if you go online. I guess some of the keys to composting is you want to make sure you're mixing in some type of brown material like straw or shredded leaves with your vegetable clippings, because otherwise compost, if you only have like your fruit and vegetable scraps from your house and you're not composting anything brown, they'll start getting smell. Also, to avoid like rodents, you don't want to compost meats or eggs or cheeses, those types of things. And then there's lots of other places here in Fairfax you can buy compost. You can buy bulk compost from like Remington Mulch Company or Merrifield Garden Center. You can buy compost by the bag from your typical home stores. I'm trying to think. My favorite source of compost though is Veteran Compost or Compost Crew. Those are two local companies that get a lot of the really nice, the nice thing about Veteran Compost is they get a lot of the nice organic leftovers from the nicest restaurants in DC, and then they mix that with wood chips and compost really nice. So you're going to get a lot of, would otherwise be expensive soil amendments. Like some gardeners will pay a lot of money to get good blood meal, for example, or bone meal. Or seashells or oyster shells. The nice thing about Veteran Compost is because you're getting restaurant scraps, you're gonna get some of those like seashells and bones composted up in that, and so you're getting a nice mixture of different materials. Native Americans always like to bury like the leftovers of fish in their soil. So nature is amazing at taking waste and turning it into something productive and beautiful again. And so we as gardeners get to kind of participate in that process of transformation of waste into something that's now life-giving.
Okay, where are we on the questions here, Corey?
Yeah, sorry, I was getting on my soapbox.
Can they stay in the seed starter soil until you transplant them into the garden? Amanda, it depends on what it is, okay? If it's a tomato and I just want to start those seeds, those are going to sprout up. I'm going to wait until they get their first true leaf and then transplant them into another container that would be maybe the size of a yogurt cup or something. And then try to only have that one transplant that one time. And when you transplant tomatoes from the little starter area that then you're going to plant it into the next one, I would say you're going to need a good cup of soil with that, for that tomato, for that one tomato, because it's going to be about 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks in this container. And you're not going to be watering it as often with the misting with the small seedlings. And you want it to be able to get used to that container. As far as fertilizer goes, Corey, I don't typically do compost tea inside watering plants, but I don't know about you. I mean, I'm always afraid of maybe
Leak out a little bit onto your counter. It was nice to put a tray underneath.
Yeah, stuff like that, and also being careful that there's no bugs or insect issues and stuff. You know, it's got to be finished compost, right? No eggshells and stuff in it, finished off.
Right, yeah. Well, the nice thing about putting the compost in water then is you can, I mean, some people when they make compost tea will put it in a, like a tea cloth or some type of, you know, an old t-shirt even.
Yeah.
Compost in a bag. And so then you're just getting kind of some of the nutrients and beneficial microbes that leach out of that compost. And so I know that I've seen studies that have shown that that's the one place that compost teas actually do show benefits, as opposed to, you know, I know there was farmers that were working really hard to make these elaborate compost tea blends with, like I said, mix, like trying to bubble the compost tea with sugars and feed something and then spread it on their fields. And it's just as easy just to put compost, and that works just as well, if not better, than making compost tea sprays for moving microbes. But where compost teas do work well is in seed starting. But you know, you and I have a little bit different philosophy, which is, I think, on I think you're a little more concerned about sterility, which is a good thing, because you know, I'm with you. I don't like to bring in flies into my house or whatnot. But
Yeah.
Teas,
but I mean, there's
just
ways to
liquid
control it.
water, I haven't had problems with gnats from that.
So there was one question, I think, for you about planting collards and greens outside and how to have to plant them outside now, and is it okay to plant them outside now?
Let's see, collards, I think it's a little bit early, but most greens, like your spinaches, your cold season lettuce can go out. This is right at the edge of cold season lettuce. And you know, there's other greens like sorrel that that's a perennial, which is really nice. That's out already. Collards, I think it's more of a southern crop. I don't think collards is quite ready. And mustard green, you could definitely have out. And kale, you can plant kale now. Arugula, I haven't planted arugula this early, but Adria, I think you can.
Oh yeah, totally arugula. Yeah. All the greens. I've grown some collards. There's this one that's called maybe it's Southern Georgia, or Georgia is the name of the collards, and I grew that early season, March through May last year. So I did okay with it. I planted it. It didn't come up as quickly in some beds than others.
I think it likes more heat. I know that.
Yeah.
Familiar with.
So there was one question about controlling bugs, and Priya, I think that was you. You had a question. I'm unsure, bugs inside or outside, like in the vegetable garden outdoors, or
outdoors. I'm talking, especially last year for the cucumber beetle. It's went very bad in my garden. I don't know how to control. You know, I tried. Finally, I give up. Honestly, that's what it happened. I used some this neem oil. Like neem oil sprays, you know, but it didn't work with them, you know, neem oil sprays that good. I don't know what to do with these kind of beetles coming in, you know.
Mm-hmm. Priya, do you have lots of different plants around your cucumbers? Like I know radishes can help repel some types of squash bugs. And
Okay.
then the other plants that I like to have in my garden, I have lots of garlic all around my garden, and then onions and marigolds. I try to have some around the perimeter of my garden or
Yeah,
mixed.
last year I started putting marigold, more marigold in the especially in the backside of my garden where the vegetable garden is. Yeah, I started that. Yeah, but it is late, you know, when like
you?
you said, it is late when the marigold flowers coming there. You know, maybe this year I should start inside first, I think.
I start some inside of the marigolds. That is one thing I do start so that I have stuff like that in my garden with the plants when they're ready to go. So that's something that you could do, or, you know, get a few starts from the garden center and then plant some more seeds. But I save a lot of my marigold seeds and just reuse them year after year. One thing, I really like this book, Carrots Love Tomatoes. And while Corey was answering the question, timing is another one of your weapons with cucumbers and with squash. So cucumbers, I do not plant early as much with tomatoes. I usually wait a little bit. And the reason why is pests. And they say here, most cucurbits are not susceptible, are not susceptible once they are past the seedling stage, certain pests. So try, this is for cucumber borer, I'm sorry. But they recommend for the other garden pests, all of those squash, cucumber, melons, all of those need to be rotated in the same spot. So if you've planted cucumbers in that same spot year after year, they will lay their eggs in the soil and will overwinter. Right now, they're still, you know, in the soil or in the leaf litter. So sometimes it's important to take a break from that area and plant something else. Is that where you've planted cucumbers year after year?
No, this is a new spot I did,
spot.
but last year I started the squash. Squash brought that boar you are talking about, you know. After that, this cucumber beetle came in. Then I am like, okay, that's it. I tried for a few weeks. I couldn't able to, you know, take them that very well. Then I let it go of it. I have no other choice, you know.
Another thing that is recommended is waiting until maybe the coolers, like waiting in sometimes can get too hot too fast with cucumbers and it gets too hot for them. And you can wait until the fall and have a fall crop, like a later crop of cucumbers.
Okay.
And those cucumber beetles often only just have one generation. And so you could miss it and plant in the fall.
Okay.
Sometimes people get frustrated with pests and it's just a matter of timing or planting a companion.
Got it. Got it.
The other thing I would say is increasing biodiversity can really be helpful because, you know, if you, in some ways, like what I've discovered is I had a huge amount of cucumber beetles like 2 years ago. And then last year, because I planted, you know, multiple places of cucumber in really good soil, hardy, I was able to get a number of different cucumbers going. And I think because there was more cucumber beetles in the prior years, I've attracted and I've done a lot of things to attract birds to my property. And so I think the birds started eating the cucumber beetles because I really did not have many cucumber beetles this past year at all. And I wonder if that's what it is. Like I've noticed, you know, I was having a huge problem with squirrels eating all the fruits that I was growing. All of my nectarines and peaches were just getting eaten. And then last year I started seeing hawks carrying squirrels away from the property. And so in general, what I'm discovering is that, you know, if instead of me trying to poison the insects, if I instead increase the food source for the insects by having more different varieties of cucumbers and more things for insects to eat, then larger predators of those insects then come to the property and start to solve some of those problems for me. And so I think, I mean, I'm a big believer in working with nature as opposed to trying to fight nature, especially if we're trying to poison the insects, then we're poisoning the birds that would otherwise eat those insects. And so as gardeners, if we encourage biodiversity and abundance, making sure we're feeding that soil so it's really healthy, that gives that cucumber the best chance to be able to resist the insects that are fighting it naturally. And then also, of course, by having lots of different cucumbers there, you're providing more food sources for insects, which means more food sources for predators, if that makes sense. So,
Thanks, Corey.
don't. It is
One of
to lose a crop like that.
Corey, for one of those things, I would also suggest, Priya, is to not grow your cucumbers on the ground. Grow them up. Definitely have some kind of trellis for them.
Okay.
Even if it's just upside down tomato cages, if you're growing in a pot, you can kind of make a little a little fence around them or something. You got to have that stuff kind of early so it's able to grab on early, but have some kind of trellis for them. And I'm a big fan of planting herbs and flowers and biodiversity in my garden as well. One of the biggest things that, and just to add on to what Corey's saying, is dill, coriander or cilantro, and other herbs, but some of the biggest ones are dill and cilantro and different ones that will have that big flower that looks like an umbrella. They are in the same family as carrots and celery and other plants that will repel pests as well. But dill is such a wonderful garden plant for pest control, and it attracts swallowtail butterflies. So it's a win-win for everybody. And if you grow a few cucumbers, you can throw some dill in there to make a little pickles or something. But I'm a big fan of planting a lot of herbs. And again, a lot of herbs are good companions for different vegetables and a lot of flowers. And planting your flowers in and among your vegetable garden will bring all the pollinators, the good guys, in to eat the bad guys. As far as cicadas go, there was a few questions on cicadas that people asked if they're going to damage the vegetable garden. I'll be honest with you, in 2004, I don't think I'm not sure if I had a vegetable garden. I think that was maybe my first year for a vegetable garden in my townhouse. And the biggest problem are going to be fruit trees, thinly barked trees, trees that have branches that are as thin as a pen or pencil. Okay. And the female cicada will use her ovipositor to pull the bark loose to put a slit in the bark, and she'll lay her eggs into that branch. It is very unlikely that they will damage tomatoes or peppers. They might crawl up them. You might find their shells on them. What I know about brood 10 is brood 10 or brood X, that's what people call it, but it is in Roman numerals. Brood 10 is about 15 states that will experience brood 10, and we will have about 1.5 million per acre. So if you live in a quarter-acre backyard, house, home, whatever, think about you and 4 of your neighbors, and about 1.5 million cicadas during this period of time, which will be around the beginning of May to the middle of May, when the soil temperature reaches 64 degrees, not the air temperature. So the soil temperature, they'll rise to the surface, and it will be a great time for those of us who love insects and entomology. It's a wonderful experience. 80 to 100 decibels is how loud these critters will be. And I don't expect a lot of damage to the vegetable garden other than their emergence. Maybe they crawl up on some of the plants that are there. They might be sunning themselves early morning. When they first emerge, they're white, almost albino looking. And then they will get their color during the first part of the morning. Their most active time is during the hottest part of the day, as far as flying, meaning flying into your head, flying into you as you're mowing the lawn or running some other kind of piece of equipment in the yard, leaf blower, string trimmer, power saw, power drill. They hear that humming and they're attracted to you, and they're going to bounce off of you or land on your shoulder. They are not interested in you. They will not hurt you. They will not try to bite you. They come out in mass number for predator satiation as their survival technique for the species. And I'm just really kind of saying to those who are citizen scientists like all of us on the phone call tonight is how exciting it's going to be. It's going to be a lot of fun. So, all right, thanks for letting me do my cicada thing. What else we got?
Someone was saying that they were having trouble growing squash, and that was one of the first times I learned about growing radishes in a circle around your young squash plant. And then that can help keep the vine borer away. And like the most common problem I've had with squash in this area is you'll see it looks like the base of the squash plant is starting to rot, and there will be a little insect that's boring into it. And you can try to pull those out, but typically it's too far gone by then. But if you can prevent that from happening by putting some radishes around it, that can help a lot. The other thing is just to make your squash plant as healthy as possible, putting it in a good mound as opposed to just trying to put it in a level soil, but build up a mound so that squash is more prone to get root rot than even some other plants. So making sure you have really good drainage there will give your squash plant the best chance of survival. And then you might be overwhelmed by having too much squash, which is a common problem for those of us that don't have a squash board to get to our squash. Let's see, other questions. Anyone want to raise their hand? I can see you if you have your video on.
I have a question. I have learned so much over the last couple of years, learning to be a master gardener, which is a great program. And my vegetable garden has not done very well, and I am learning why. But I've also had problems with pests. So I've had thrips, aphids, and spider mites on many of my vegetables and flowers. I think part of it is because I wasn't following some of the guidance, the biodiversity, and using the good compost and stuff like that. But in the meantime, is there anything while I'm still growing or getting nice compost and everything that I can do about aphids? The aphids are the worst, I think, on the tomato plants the most. And I spray them with water. But is there anything else I can do with aphids on my tomatoes?
I would plant more herbs around your tomatoes.
Yeah.
Dill and cilantro. And the reason why is because they attract other insects that are going to eat those aphids, and that, parasitic wasps and other things that are attracted to those plants. I have released ladybugs in my yard. I don't know, Corey, you have you done that, or
Yeah, we have ladybugs that live in our house. It's really odd. Here, there was a whole bunch of ladybugs in one room of our house, and so we've been trying to get them all to catch them and take them outside. And so we have a pretty good ladybug population that has made aphids not a problem here.
You could always release some ladybugs, and I can give you some tips.
I thought about that too. They were the worst last year, and for some reason my dill didn't grow last year because there's always all the beneficial insects on my dill, but it just didn't take off last year.
All right.
Try it again.
There you go.
Carrie, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm just, if I were to build or to get somebody to build some, say, elevated raised beds for me, is there a source, are there area sources of lumber that would not mean just taking, fresh new lumber? I'm just interested in doing that as sustainably as possible.
That's a really good question, Carrie. And I did get your email earlier, and I'm sorry that I haven't responded to that.
No problem.
You know, Etsy is sometimes a way, like I've seen cedar lumber made. I personally know a guy named Rusty that lives about an hour, actually out towards Winchester, and he has a portable sawmill and will come and cut up logs if you have big logs to cut up into lumber. For like $160 is his price, and I think he charges like, yeah, it's $100 to come and set up, and then $60 an hour is his price to cut up logs into lumber. So I had that done for a lot of my raised beds because I had some giant white pines that died on my property, and so I do actually have some lumber in my barn. Talk to me offline. I can sell you some of that if you're. I don't know who to tell you right now who could construct it for you, but I do have some local pine that I haven't a use for right now.
Okay, thanks. I'll contact you.
Sure thing.
There also used to be a place that would sell recycled wood that was kind of rescued from houses that were being torn down. Like, you know, some of the 2x10s used for like roof rafters and stuff. If those are kind of reclaimed lumber, and there used to be a place down in the new, more like off of Backlick by Franconia, like Springfield area. But I don't know if they still do that or not. The other idea would be like a Habitat for Humanity, because they will sometimes get a lot of lumber that is removed from houses where, say, somebody's taking the roof off and lifting and adding a second floor on, they have to put a new roof. All of those roof lines can be reused.
And there's Habitat, they're called Restores.
Yeah, Habitat Restore, yeah.
RE, and there's one in like kind of Springfield, a little bit closer in, I don't know if I think it's a Springfield address.
There's also one in like Chantilly, out Route 50.
Yes, that's right. So you can find gardening things around at some of those restores, some of the lumber to make smaller beds, or even like, a little planter. The one that I had a picture of that was against the fence, that was made from recycled lumber from like a Habitat Restore. I bought it, put it together. Angie's dad helped me transport it, and I treated it with like a linseed oil. So.
Thank you.
There's also like Free Cycle and Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. Sometimes people will give free wood or free. I mean, you can use pallet lumber. I know some people use that. Not a real big fan of it because I mean some of it's strong and good, but you have to. It's hard to figure out the history of how it might have been contaminated.
I actually have learned that there's a stamp on the side of the pallet, and it'll say if it's heat treated or if it was chemically treated. And you can look online, and they kind of put that in with like a heated stamp, almost like they brand them, you know what I mean? And so I do know that the heat treated ones you could use for planting edibles. Of course, if it was chemical treated, you could only really plant something that you're not going to eat. So. All right, I think we're whittling it down. There was one question: what can be planted outside with edibles by the end of May for preschoolers?
Oh,
you got preschoolers.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're wanting to plant at the end of the May, because you could plant strawberries and actually get a harvest. But you might want to plant a little bit earlier than the end of May. I mean, like if you planted a more mature plant, you could get strawberries like as you're planting it. Basically, you can buy some that already have strawberries on them, which is very popular with preschoolers. Preschoolers love to pull things out of the ground, like pulling up a carrot is just really magical for elementary school kids as well, or potatoes, like digging up a shovel full of potatoes, but that's not May.
Carrots you could plant now.
Carrots are May. You plant them, you'd want to plant them earlier than May, but you could pull them out of the ground in May, which would be fun for the kids. Kids will even, like, I know my kids really love pansies, which seems a little odd, but they love to eat the little flower petals off of pansies. There's most pansies, I think most pansies are edible. I know so that's something that's really fun for preschoolers. May is early in the season. Asparagus comes up in May. Honeyberries. You could do like what's called haskap, Haskap. But that would be something you would plant. You could plant in May, and then next year you would probably get your first harvest from honeyberries or haskap. Trying to think.
If it's something you want to plant right now, and
Yeah.
so that you can harvest in May for the kids, if it were me, I would try carrots and peas,
Mm-hmm.
and
Like
call it,
peas.
call it the peas and carrots garden, and it would be a great little thing. And while peas, you could even eat some of the sprouts. The little sprouts of leaves are great in a salad, or in a stir fry early on, before it kind of gets too tough. But carrots, I would say, and peas, lettuce too, but you might have more exciting things with the crunch of the peas and the carrots.
Yeah, my kids absolutely love spring peas, especially like the sugar snap peas that you can eat the whole pod.
Yep.
So that's a really good thing to plant. And you can plant that right now, and it should be. And there's some that you could have. I guess let's see, it's March. So yeah, easily you could do you could have peas at the beginning of May. If you like a 45-day pea.
Some peas are 55 days, and some are. If you need some pea seeds, ask Stacy and I, because we have pea seeds now, and they should be planted now. So on St. Patrick's Day is one of the gardener's traditions to plant your greens, your peas, your carrots, and some folks plant potatoes. I've never planted that early. I don't know about you, Corey, on St.
I
Patrick's
have
Day.
some potatoes in the ground already.
Do you? Okay, good for you. And they're doing okay?
Well, I put them in this week, and so
This past weekend?
I
Okay.
expect to see them for another 2 weeks, probably poking.
Yeah.
I planted them 8 inches down, but the soil was workable, and so yeah, I've had luck planting them this early. In fact, they usually do better because later when it gets hot, potatoes don't like the heat.
Nope. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I don't know if we have any more. If you have something burning, stick up your hand now. Let us know. You can always let us know what your questions are, and master gardeners are always willing to help and answer questions by email or on the phone. And thank you, everybody, for all your nice compliments.
So yeah, thank you so much, Virginia Cooperative Extension, represented today by Adria, for helping co-host this event with the Fairfax Food Council. Diane Charles is here, who's the coordinator of the Fairfax Food Council. So on behalf of everyone that made this event possible, thank you very much for coming. Thanks for staying with us this long, and have a great night. And
Thanks.
it.
Thanks, Corey, for being my partner in crime. I always enjoy it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks
Yeah,
all
it's
the
a
audience for the
blast.
good questions.
We make a good team. We have a lot of similar ideas about food and food justice, and that is really important to us. Everybody, growing food is really important, and when you grow the food yourself, that's what's so exciting about eating it. And just a little story about my my nieces, when we picked all those sweet potatoes, we had some that were orange and some that were purple. And I said, well, you want to take some home? And they're like, yeah. And I said, okay, which ones do you want to take home? And I'm thinking they want to take a little of each. Oh, we only want the purple ones. Well, why? Because we have the orange ones all the time. We've never had the purple ones. So, I mean, that kind of stuff can be pretty exciting. And even to the kid inside of you, I get really excited about new stuff. You see how Corey gets really excited about growing new different things in your garden. So I just really hope that you all enjoy your gardening season. Corey, it was great to have you as my co-presenter. And Bree Arthur next time.
That's right. We'll have Bree Arthur here on April 14th talking about how to grow edible plants in your front yard and landscaping. So she wrote the book Foodscape Revolution, and it'll be great. And yeah, I got to tell the story too. My kids always ask me, Dad, did you grow this? And if I grew it, they're going to try it. And so I've got a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old that love salads and tomatoes and garden vegetables, and they are much more likely to eat they almost always eat my garden produce, but they won't eat a lot of things if it's not as fresh as what we can harvest and eat here. All right. Thanks again for coming.
Okay,
Good
take
night,
care
everyone.
of yourself. All right, see you soon.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.